Alright, so I found some really cool CSS websites that you guys should probably check out. These are everything from creating cool CSS shadows, animations, to even creating some cool shapes and gradients. Let's have a look at them. Shadows. We love them, we hate them, but they never look quite right on a website. I don't know what it is about CSS, but somehow they didn't really understand how nature works with shadows. This is where Shadows Brum, I think it is, comes into play. It does all the extra stuff of shadows that we wanted but we never quite got, and it gives us the CSS we need to be able to achieve that look. So even here we've got this nice box with a box shadow where the sun is sort of coming in from maybe the top here and casting this shadow on the box, which looks really nice. And we can adjust how many layers this has. So obviously the more layers you add, the nicer the shadow looks, but it's also darker as well. But you get a little bit of fine grain control here on the right hand side to adjust the shadow to look exactly how you might want it. You might want to make it darker or lighter, really up to you. But this is a great website you can check out and adjust and create your own shadows for boxes and add them into your CSS. You also have a little bit more detail here on how to essentially create the curve that you normally have for the shadows, and this is added straight into the CSS as well as how quickly they adjust in terms of, I suppose, the depth here. I think you can also adjust where the shadow is coming from. So let's have a look here. I think if we just go up, up here, we could, for example, adjust it to go from the center or to the right. We could probably move these boxes down like this, and now it's a little bit more centered. Interesting. And then we've also got a little bit of spread that we can reduce so that we can make it inset a little bit more. But all really cool. There's also like a plugin here for Figma, and you can also follow them on Twitter now. So that's pretty nice. They've got 1,000 followers there, so make sure you hit a like on them. Personally, I like to reverse the alpha for the shadow, and this makes it feel more like the Google paper. The depth seems to pop right off the page, and personally I like this look. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what this website works like, and you should check it out. I'll link it in the description below along with all the others. SVG waves are the future of what we're seeing all the time in web design now. We're seeing little shapes and designs and waves whenever we're seeing those new website designs, because that is what is trending right now. So this website here lets you create beautiful SVG waves. Well, good ones anyway. We've got the option here for zigzags, which I'm not going to use, but we get adjustments here for how wide or how much horizontal, I suppose, waves we get, as well as one here for how vertical they are. And we can also randomize all of these options and set different colors. And once we're done, we can download an SVG or a PNG or literally copy paste the clipboard for that and paste that straight into our code if we wanted to. So this is a nice website by Softer that you guys should check out. Now, I did give you some warning that SVG shapes are the future of a lot of web design, and here's another one, Fancy Border Radius. This essentially uses just plain CSS to create a nice looking like SVG shape, and this one looks like it's a sort of a curve, circle, square thing. Not too sure, but you can adjust it to look however you want. You could like pull these things into the corners here to make this sort of eclipse looking like thing. It's really up to you. You could even adjust the width and the height, or you can keep it dynamic. But that's a pretty cool little thing that you can start using, and you can put these shapes all over the place. You can even do some cool CSS animations using them, like we're seeing here in the background with these blobs which are moving about the page, as well as changing the shape and size. Now, I don't know if neomorphism is your thing. For some people, they love it. Other people just don't like it whatsoever. But if you are into that and you want to generate some of your own neomorphism without the headaches of trying to figure out how you're going to do that with CSS, there's neumorphism.io. And as you can see, you can choose which angle or which side the neomorphism appears from. And from that, you can generate exactly the look and style that you want. So here we've got this flat style. We can do this indented or outdented version, as well as a flat style as well. And from those, we get the CSS that we need to be able to implement them. We can also customize the shaping and the sizing so we can get a better idea of what this looks like. And as you can imagine, we do get updated CSS as we're applying these. Personally, I think that anything with neumorphism needs a little bit more intensity. Otherwise, for me, it just doesn't stand out enough for it to be effective. But hopefully this gives you a better idea of how to create some quick neumorphism without too much worry, I suppose. Now, I'm terrible at clipping images. The CSS syntax for that also just doesn't really fit into my head. But there is this website here called CSS Clip-path Maker. And this allows you to clip any type of CSS that you want, but it goes one step further to let you even modify exactly how this looks and how it works. So you can select these points and pick for it to work exactly how you want. You can pick different shapes like this one over here, and you can customize that too. But on top of that, if you want a custom image, you can select a URL on the right-hand side here. You can even show and hide the clip path so you can see exactly what you're clipping when you're modifying the shape. Of course, if you want a custom shape, you can do that too. You can select some points, and you could make a beautiful looking like A shape here that essentially looks like an upwards arrow on Google Maps. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how to clip shapes nice and easy, and then you can just grab the CSS syntax here at the very bottom left and paste that into your code straight away. The cubic bezier is essentially a value that we use for animation inside of CSS. It describes how the animation flows during its duration, from start to end. And we can see the difference here in this curve, which is an ease curve. And both of the pink and the blue one here are the same, but if I was to swap to this linear curve, we can immediately see the difference of animation that is applied using this. And this gives you an idea if you're trying to customize animation for your website, because each curve will allow your text or items or images to animate differently, and you might want to have better fine-grained control over that. So while this ease curve here works quite well, we could always make it a stronger curve, and by doing so we get a slightly different animation that's being applied. Here it's almost too strong, so I could make that a little bit less, but it gives you an idea of how having closer fine-grained control over that could make your animations look better for your website. Another thing we're seeing more often these days are CSS gradients. They're everywhere. They're on backgrounds, they're overlaid on text, and they're something that you want to be able to have fine-grained control over. And sometimes Photoshop or Figma or even just the Chrome DevTools don't give you the level of control you might want. So here we've got CSSGradients.io, and here we've got better control over exactly what that gradient looks like. And when we're applying these, we've got the CSS, which is compatible with IE6, applied. We can do this as a radial or a linear. We can select whether the gradient goes to the top or to the right here, and we can select the colors or even add additional sections here, I suppose, or stop points for our gradient to make it look however we want. We could, for example, make this look like something I would see on Enhance UI. So I'll add a couple of stops here, and I'll add maybe a nice red color, and it gives it a little bit more visual appeal, a little bit more color. You don't want to have too many points, because if you do that, you might lose the effect that you want to apply through the gradient, but you could play around with some really nice colors here to create a nice looking design. Earlier, we saw a website for creating waves, but waves are so popular that you can't just have one website for it. There's multiple good ones here. This one is called getwaves.io, and this one works a little bit different because it gives you a few more options here. You have things for waves as well as squares and zigzags, but I personally like this one because the generator here feels like it's making waves that look more realistic to me. I get more control over whether the waves look more flat or if there's more waves in general. But I personally like it just near here, near the bottom echelon of the options, where I get waves that just are very subtle, but they could flow into another section. I can obviously make them at the top or at the bottom, and I can select a different color to apply to them. But once this is all done, I simply select here and I get the SVG, essentially that allows me to create this wave function straight into my code, so I could copy paste that in. So hopefully you guys can check this one out. I personally think it's a really good one, and you should also have a look at their Figma plugin, which I didn't know they have, because I'm using Figma all the time, and it's a plugin that could be quite useful. We've seen two wave websites. Here's the third. This is called SVG Wave. and this is one where you have multiple waves stacked. This is a little bit different because of that fact, but let's take a look at some of the things we could do. So for example, we could have more or less waves here. I'm just gonna do less, but I like the fact that we can add more and more layers because this feels like it's getting some depth. Let's add some height to that, and maybe let's change the color here to something like orange. And this could give the effect of a sunset, or we could even have a moving wave. So this is really cool, and we could as well, I think, flip it. Yeah, we can flip it as well, so that could look like a horizon. So there's quite a few different options here, and I really like this website because of the animation. We can then pull this out as an SVG, but this SVG, if we take a closer look at it, we'll see that it actually has some CSS here with some durations in ease in and ease out, and these will apply the animation straight into the code when we copy paste it out. So that's really cool and something that could just bring a little bit more life into your next website. This chaotic looking website with animations everywhere, and it looks like it's got some animated waves in the background and text and animated little images is a little bit too much for me in terms of design, but in terms of functionality, loading.io gives you the option to create loading bars as animations of GIFs, SVGs, CSS, or even PNGs. And this is quite useful because if you're creating a website, you want something custom. And here you get a lot of variety, I suppose, to say, of different types of loading animations that you could apply for your next website. Personally, I think this is quite useful because for the longest period, I've just had like maybe a flashing dot or something really basic for my loading animations, and I think having something more unique or dynamic or having a little bit more control over what that looks like is pretty cool. So here you can change the color for your animations, you can change whether they're transparent or not, you can pick their scale, their speed, which might not be always the best choice if you're picking something at fast speed, but if you make it slower, it could look quite good. And I think there is a free tier here, which there is, and there's also a paid version. And I think this also does a lot more than just animations. There's a text version to this. There's also a progress bar version to this. So this is a pretty cool website to check out for all things loading animations. If you like this, check out the latest CSS frameworks that you guys should use for your next project, because we don't want to build CSS from scratch, and having a framework like Bootstrap or say Tailwind CSS just makes life easier.